Hello, fellow researchers. For this video, I will share information about various considerations when starting to design your research project. Today, the presentation will address institutional approval for human and non-human participants and how to obtain active informed consent. Then this presentation explores decisions on the type and size of the sample the study will need and the research instruments used to collect data from that sample. And lastly, considerations for the research protocol will be explored. Let's start with obtaining institutional approval. IACUC approves research on non-human animals. The researcher must submit a design plan with clear procedures for the IACUC review. Some considerations include negating or minimizing pain and discomfort, use of sedatives and analgesics, any procedures with surgery, and possible euthanasia. If the IACUC does not approve the study, then the researcher must rework the plan and resubmit for approval, or abort the study. The goal of many researchers is to find ways to help humans through learning about the natural world and how we can manipulate it to human benefit. Sometimes that requires experimenting on animals with similar features to humans. The albino rat has been a popular choice among scientists. However, in order to ensure that the results of their studies are transferable to humans, researchers must use human participants at some point in their research. When the study involves human participants, then the IRB reviews and approves the study. In this case, some IRB concerns are the welfare of the participants, their informed consent, procedures that do not harm participants, and the weight of the benefits of the study versus the harm. If the board agrees to the study, the research can begin. However, if the board disapproves of the study, then the researcher must revamp the plan and resubmit it or abort the study. When searching for human participants, the researcher should consider the questions as shown on this slide. The most important of which, where will the researcher find participants for the study? This is crucial to the design and planning of the research for the IRB to review. For example, if one is doing a study on students, then there must be schools conveniently located and accessible to the researcher. This brings our review to the question of informed consent. All participants must be fully informed of the procedures of the study, the risks involved, and the benefits of the study. If children are involved in the study, then parents must give informed consent, and the researcher should still try to get verbal consent from the children. Once the researcher has an approved study design and decided on which participants are needed, then the next issue is the matter of sample size. The more participants that are in the study, the more the relationships between the variables can be found and analyzed. In research, this is known as the power of the statistical test. The power of a sample is determined by how much the statistical analysis shows the null hypothesis is rejected, which means there is a relationship between or among the variables. The larger the number of participants, the greater the power. Of the four factors that affect power shown on this slide, the sample size is the one that the researcher can control. When deciding the sample size, the researcher should consult the chart, a portion of which is shown on this page, that will assist in deciding how many participants are needed. The researcher must decide on the type of test that will be used, then determine the alpha coefficient of either 0.01 or 0.05, and lastly determine from the literature review whether the effect size is medium, small, or large, and then apply those factors to this table. This information will show the recommended number of participants. Before taking the time to collect participants and start the study, the researcher should also conduct a pilot study. The benefits of a pilot study are outlined in this slide. The basic premise is that the researcher can use the pilot study to find any problems in conducting the study and adjust the design of the study to solve those problems. Any changes to the design must again be approved by the IRB. The next consideration is to decide how to collect the data that will show the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. The researcher may actively manipulate the independent variable, so the way to collect their data will have to be developed. Then, the dependent variable must be measured and the method of data collection must be clearly defined. Some examples are shown on this slide. Before submitting the study design to the IRB for approval, the research protocol must be explained in detail. The researcher must lay out the procedures and the directions and explain all parts of the research design. The IRB may disapprove of the study, and then you may want to adjust the procedures and resubmit. On the next slide are some protocol considerations. When planning for the research study, each step of the process should flow smoothly and seamlessly into the next. If animals are being used, then one must specify how the animal will be handled in the transfer to and from the laboratory as well as in the laboratory. How the animal is kept and maintained must also be specified. But for the remainder of this presentation, we will look at human participants. The first set of considerations is found on this slide. Besides the research protocol considerations shown here, Nate et al. Add a rather progressive idea to designing a research plan. They have concluded that the researcher should also consider the economic health of the participants. The economic health of a participant could provide a reason why the results from the dependent variable may have been affected by something other than the independent variable. This slide shows more considerations for the researcher. Lohr et al. Explained that clearly written instructions were one of the most important aspects of research design when working with other researchers. In a study about what causes conflict in a research study by more than one researcher, Lohr et al. Found that the conflicting driver, called a lack of written instructions, was ranked higher than the other conflicting drivers. Finally, after the study concludes, the researcher should consider a debriefing of the participants. Information about a debriefing is shared on this slide. Researchers approach a debriefing in one of two ways, either providing a form that contains relevant information and a way to collect participant thoughts, or in a face-to-face interview, the preferred method according to Christensen et al. The researcher should start by checking to see if the participant has any questions, then ask about each phase of the study. The researcher should then ask about any feelings the participants had about the study and whether there were any difficulties. In this presentation, we have reviewed institutional approval, informed consent, and working with human and non-human participants. We reviewed the type and size of the sample and the instruments used to collect data. And finally, the research protocols were considered. I expect that this presentation provides good information to get a researcher started on a study.